Hello, I'm Brenda. This is Write Your Memoir and Change Your Life. Today I'm interviewing Gil Merrick with his book, Haunted Victory. Now, Gil and I know each other really well. We've worked long and hard on his memoir, and now we're both super excited that his memoir is released and available and ready for people to read. And today I'm interviewing Gil to ask him about his process and about his book. And I'm hoping that in going through this process, it's going to help you when you're writing your memoir to have some idea of some of the challenges you may experience that Gil has experienced too. So Gil, my first question to you is, what is your memoir about? Because we all know memoirs have to be about something. And your memoir takes us into the equestrian sport of dressage. However, your story isn't about dressage and the glamour of it per se. It's rather the setting for the story. So can you tell us what your memoir is about?
Sure thing. It's a story about the choices we make in the face of our circumstances, those that we're born into, those that we make ourselves, and those that are thrown in our path. It shows the power of having a dream to live into and how that helps determine our choices. My dreams are related to my life as an equestrian. My circumstances included being born an effeminate boy and dealing with the vulnerabilities that come with that. In my case, my choices led me into the grips of a sexual predator. When I finally escaped, all my future choices were influenced by the trauma from that abuse, choices that led me to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol. Ultimately, my memoir is about healing after being forced to make the ultimate choice, to either continue drinking and die or to achieve sobriety and live.
So as you approach this difficult topic, what first drew you to writing your story? What did you personally want to get out of writing your memoir? Because so many of us approach saying, oh, I want to write this memoir. I've got something to say. So what drew you to writing your memoir?
Well, part of my recovery program was to work with a mental health professional. And after 6 months of treatment, she recommended I write my story in the form of an autobiography. She explained the value in outlining the events in my life chronologically, and then asking questions such as, how did I get to that place in my life? And what choices did I make when I realized what was happening? And what was I feeling at each juncture? And how do I feel about it now? As I was beginning to write my story, my dear friend Mary Gober reminded me about my lifelong passion to teach. She suggested that telling my story and making it available to others might make a valuable contribution to their lives. They could learn through my experience about how to better understand and manage their own mental health journeys. So it's the reward I gained from being able to make that kind of contribution to someone else's life. And that's what had me commit to turning my autobiography into a memoir that others would want to read. And that's how I found you.
That's true. So Gail, you were explaining that starting your writing journey was actually encouraged by your health mental professional. So did you actually find that in joining these links, by writing your story, by going back to look at your life and ask yourself these questions that your mental health professional suggested, did you find that it actually did help you see your life differently? It did help you join the dots? Because that's one of the things I find I encourage people to do when they write their memoirs, is that they get to see their life afresh and differently. They start to see links that they hadn't seen before. And so was that the case for you?
Absolutely. In fact, when I moved away from California, which is where the last part of my story unfolds, my therapist was unable to continue with me because of California law. So when I moved to Florida, I was without a therapist. And writing this memoir was my therapy, because diving into those questions and really peering in and saying, okay, I can't write about it until I understand it. And it provoked thought after thought after thought. And I consulted with a few people who know me closely, but what I realized was those thoughts are private to me and only I can answer the questions. And I don't know that I ever would have delved this deeply into it if I hadn't had this project of writing about it.
Well, that's quite profound then, that writing your memoir has been a very instrumental part of your healing and understanding your life and seeing it from a different perspective. Now, you were sharing the personal topic of your story is about being sexually abused, by the trauma that followed afterwards, the addiction that followed afterward, after all those years of abuse. And so your book talks about a not often spoken about topic by men, and that is the sexual abuse of young boys. And in your instance, it was from a person of authority and trust, your trainer. And so the trauma of sexual abuse, we believe, as you and I are aware, is shared by 1 out of every 6 men, as the statistic goes. And yet very few men have broken their silence. So can I ask, why have you chosen to be one of those men who has chosen to break his silence and put his life in a book for others to read?
Yeah, I'll come at it this way. Just over 30 years ago, I developed a training program. It's called the Mastery Course, The Art of Living Life Masterfully. And I've been teaching it ever since. And the main goal of the course is to show people that regardless of the circumstances in our life and the choices we make in the face of them, there's nothing wrong with any of us. And I believe that all of us are doing the best we can at any given time using what we have to work with. Over the past year, when I told friends and loved ones about my memoir, I got some version of this response when I told them I'm living with complex PTSD due to childhood sexual abuse. They'd say, I had no idea you went through that. And I had no idea you've suffered from addiction your whole life. You've been so successful and accomplished so much. I never would have guessed. Well, no one ever guessed, because part of living with trauma includes harboring feelings of guilt and shame, and we don't know what to do with those feelings. We're terrified someone will find out our secrets, so we become masterful at hiding them. By breaking my silence, I'm showing other men that they're not alone, that there's nothing wrong with them because of what happened to them as a child.
What strikes me about what you've just shared is, one, that we often think people who are suffering from trauma are not coping with life. But from what you're sharing, on one level, you are coping with life because you are highly functioning. You were very successful in your career. You were successful in your work. And so we often get this picture then that people who have suffered deep trauma, if you're highly functioning, you can't be suffering from trauma. So at what stage did you actually realize you're suffering from trauma? And then can you perhaps explain what complex PTSD is? Because so many people, I think, are aware of PTSD, but not necessarily complex PTSD.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'll fish a little bit for the dates, but the first time I went into therapy was in the year, it was about 1996 or 1997. And I had been traumatized through 1979. During that gap, I had no idea that I had been traumatized. I never recognized it for what it was, and I certainly never saw how it was influencing every decision I had made from 1979 on. I wasn't aware of it. I justified it all. I thought it was just, my individual situation. I made some bad choices, and I didn't understand why I'd done what I'd done. And I also didn't understand what trauma was. It wasn't until my second course of therapy, which was 3 years ago, that I heard the term complex PTSD. And my therapist explained, she said, if somebody's been in a horrible car accident, if they've been through war and they've seen, horrible incidents of suffering, and those events are traumatic, and many times it will impact their entire life because of the intensity of the trauma involved. And yet many people, but so often children, they endure a traumatizing event over and over again over years. And that's why they give it the term complex, because it's built upon itself, it's persisted, it feeds itself almost. And during the 7 years that I was being abused by a predator, I hadn't a clue in the world I was being abused. And I was unable to get out of it because I didn't recognize there was anything wrong about what was going on. This was a person of authority. I was getting something out of it. I had a dream to become masterful at the art of training horses. This man was holding it out to me as, I can do that for you. I can get you to the Olympics. At 14 years old, those are dreams come true. So he's an adult. He's twice my age. I trust him. And blind to the fact, even though I say in the book, something felt wrong from the first minute it started. It just felt wrong. But I got deeper into it and deeper into it. So coming out of it, it's different than having had one intense incident that is traumatic when it persists over time. And I know that children who suffer from physical abuse from caregivers and people who have had other forms of long-term abuse, the complexity of that says to me why it's called complex PTSD. And I think it refers to the length of time over which it occurs, different from a one-time event.
But was there at some stage the sense that there's something wrong with me that you couldn't quite put your finger on?
I know that during those 7 years, because I was in a horse riding environment and my friends were there, I, of course, was terrified that my friends might find out what was actually going on when I was alone with my predator. And so I think at that point, I got expert at hiding what was going on. So I must have had feelings of shame or that I was allowing something to happen that was a secret that I shouldn't tell about, and therefore there must be something wrong with it. And I had gone into the situation absolutely certain there was something wrong with me, that I didn't fit in, I wasn't good enough, I wasn't masculine enough, I wasn't competent, that I was a sissy. And in the eyes of my student, my peers, my students at school, there was something wrong with me, and I believed there was something wrong with me. It's when I started with training with my abuser that I started to get the confidence, hold on, I'm actually good at things. And this is a place where I shine, but my friends were all around and I did everything to hide from them what was actually happening. And I write about that with one of my friends in a scene in the book when I finally came forward and said what was happening.
So, Gil, thanks for sharing these personal aspects about your life. And I'd like to talk to you now about your writing experience, the part of being a writer. How has this shift into being a writer felt for you? Is it something you've come into that you've thoroughly enjoyed?
Throughout my career, I wrote a lot of what I call corporate reports. My job always involved writing summaries of what was going on. I was in the controlling department, so I presented board reports and I wrote things. And I even, for the seminars that I taught, I didn't read from a script when I taught them, but I certainly had notes that I wrote out. I always enjoyed it and I wonder if I have the talent to actually write something that's not a corporate report on something. And I was talking to a friend that I acknowledge at the end of my book named Linda, and she's a professional writer. And I started talking to her about that, and she just opened up the possibility that, there's certain things that it requires and certain traits you have to have and certain skills you need to develop, but it doesn't matter that you don't have them, you can develop them. And at that point, I started thinking, one day I'm going to write something that's not for my work. It's going to be something personal. And then, as I explained a little earlier, it was the transition into therapy that really had me commit to this project. And I've loved every bit of it. And now I declare myself to be a writer, and I intend to write more in the future.
Your book is well written and you have a gift for writing. You certainly do, in how you piece words together, the images that you can create, your ability to express yourself. It certainly does come through. You've done a great transition from corporate writing to writing your memoir. Now, in your process of writing, I know for myself when I wrote my memoir, and I see it a lot in people that I help and coach, that many writers get stuck at some stage in writing their memoir. And so did this happen for you? When did this happen for you? Do you know why it happened? And then how did you overcome it?
Yeah, it happened about 5 months into the writing. I'd identified numerous themes in my story, and I was having trouble figuring out which ones were actually fundamental to my story's premise and which ones weren't. I was struggling with how to bring focus to my story so readers would know exactly what my promise to them is. I was only able to overcome the confusion and get unstuck because of your coaching. I needed your expertise to work me through all the questions that answer the final question, what's in it for the reader? What's my promise? I wouldn't have been able to do that on my own. You got me unstuck.
What was the first thing you did when you decided to write your story? Did you just start writing? Did you plan it? What did you plan? I mean, I know that your mental health professional suggested you start writing about your life, but when you now started to do this, how did you jump in and do it?
Well, the first thing I did is what I always do when I start any project. I opened an Excel spreadsheet. And my story covers a span of 63 years. And much of my life was spent traveling within the US and overseas. So I went through all my passports from the past 40 years and logged into a spreadsheet every city I'd been to that required an entry and exit stamp at passport control. And then I created a chronology of my travels. And then I started a new spreadsheet that answered the questions, why was I there and what was I doing? And from that, I built out a complete chronology of my life. Then I decided to write the story of my life. And it wasn't until I met you that I realized without being a celebrity, nobody except my friends and family would care about that story. So you remember it ran about 220,000 words. It's hard to believe you took me on as a client, knowing it would have to be reduced by more than half to turn it into a memoir that anyone would want to read. But the 500 hours it took to write that first manuscript was, in hindsight, the perfect training ground for finding my writer's voice and learning how to write a story. Looking back, I'm thrilled that I started this way.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, we often talk about the vomit draft or the first draft, and that's exactly what it does. It helps us get all those things out that we first need to process on the page, and we can go about it different ways. And you've explained how you've gone about yours very methodically and detailed, but also it was part of your counseling and part of your recovery. But to then find the way how we're going to put it on the page and then find what is our voice, what is it that we're going to take out of all of our life and hone it and make this what the story is about. So you've gone through this whole writing process. You got engaged with me. We started working on it together. But if you were to start it again and now having gone through this process, what would you do differently? Or would you do anything differently?
I think I'd spend more time at the beginning working through my structure. I'd decide up front how many words I wanted the manuscript to be, and then structure the acts and the chapters and the parts accordingly. And I would engage a writing coach right at the start so I could have support through the initial planning phase. As the author of writing about my life, I'm so in it. I remember so many times you telling me, that's, and I'll talk in a minute, I think about the killing our darlings, but you would say, that's an interesting story and it certainly impacted your life, but it's not part of this story. And once I finally kind of caught on to what that meant, it made more sense to me, but you helped make it easy. I wouldn't have gotten there on my own.
Gil, the title of your book is Haunted Victory. And something that is often key to the writing process is to have a working title for your manuscript. So my question for you is, how did you decide on a working title? And did your working title become the final title of your book, which is Haunted Victory?
I decided on my working title early on. I remember the day I was having an especially good week. I was feeling optimistic. I was accomplishing a lot. I was enjoying my newfound sobriety. but something was trying to pull me down into a depression. And I couldn't identify what that was. And that's when I recognized the truth about living with complex PTSD, depression, and addiction, that they're conditions, diseases that can be managed, but they never go away. And although I knew I'd scored victories on many fronts, their presence was haunting, knowing that these aren't going away. And when those two words, victory and haunting, came into my mind, it just clicked. And you and I experimented with some different titles based on the structure of the book and the way we were putting it together. And then when it came time to a subtitle and really putting it together, I still liked it. It just felt right. And so I stayed with it.
So it started as your working title. As you said, we kind of tested a few other things along the way, but then came back to it that no, this is exactly what it is and why, what the meaning and the story is behind it.
Yeah.
So working with Haunted Victory as your initial working title, which eventually became your final title, how did it help you focus your story as you wrote it?
Well, it helped me focus on how to weave a central theme through my story. My story tells how I overcame my circumstances to end up victorious on many fronts. And at the end of the book, I give a name to those deep-rooted forces that will always be with me because of the childhood trauma and the addictions I developed to cope with its effects.
So it's not a case of, oh, well, I'm healed, it's all over. It's a sense of something you have to live with and come to terms with and grapple with as you go forward in your life. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Gil, how long did it take you from starting to write your book to get to this point where your book is now launched and available for people to read?
I started outlining the autobiography in March of 2022. You and I began working together in September of 22, which is when I actually began writing the memoir I have today. So I'd say 18 months.
Okay. And what was your writing routine during those 18 months?
Well, I would take a 3-mile walk every day for an hour, and I used the time to visualize the scenes I'd write that day. I scheduled 5 hours a day to write. I have the luxury of that much time, 2.5 hours in the afternoon, and then 2.5 hours in the evening. And I started by editing my work from the previous day and then writing my rough draft for the new scenes. And once I'd finished with the entire draft, I would print it out and then make written edits. And you taught me to read the manuscript out loud while editing, and that helped tremendously. I recommend that to every writer. And then after I finished a major section of the manuscript, I sent it to you. And after receiving your edits in the form of the track changes in my Word document, and we'd met to discuss them, I'd enter those changes and start with a clean draft. And I don't remember how many times we worked through the manuscript that way, but it was at least 3.
Yes, definitely at least 3. I read it more times than 3, though, that's for sure. Yeah. So originally your intention was actually to get a literary agent and to traditionally publish, and we were very much in discussion about doing that. So what caused you to change direction and to choose to self-publish instead?
Well, I did a lot of research about how to find a literary agent, and I realized it could be a long and arduous process and no guarantee of success. So I asked myself, well, what's the advantage of having an agent? And the answer was, if I found a traditional publisher, they would take over the expense of printing and promoting the book. But I would lose ownership of the intellectual property rights. I wanted control over the publishing process, which isn't possible for a new author with a traditional publisher. And I have a business partner who's an expert in online marketing. So receiving those services from a publisher didn't seem valuable enough to offset the costs of losing my rights to my story and not having control over the timing of its publication.
That's an important thing that you mentioned, the timing of your publication, because I know that you're also wanting to use your book as part of the platform for this course that you've developed. So would you like to tell us a little bit about your course and what it's about and who it's for?
Certainly. In my memoir, I talk about how over a period of years, I became intrigued with the concept of mastery. And I was privileged to work with a master horse trainer and other people who I considered to have mastery in their lives. And I developed a course that was initially designed for athletes. And it dealt with how to manage their lives away from the training ground. So whatever their sport was, whatever they were doing, so that when they showed up to train, they were able to focus and be not bring their stress with them from their day-to-day life. So it was a kind of life management course, and I called it The Art of Living Life Masterfully. And then through my corporate career, I started incorporating those training principles into managing teams, managing products, providing leadership, and they were very successful. And so when COVID came along, I've been delivering all those courses face to face in seminar environments. And of course, that all ended in 2020. And people said to me, why don't you convert your material into online training modules? And I'd never really thought about doing it because everything was face to face. And then my hand was forced. And so I've just completed 3 different courses. One's called the Mastery Course. I have one called Leading Teams and another one on eliminating stress. And they're now available on a website, masterycourses.com. And it's 10-minute learning lessons, and it's self-paced as people learn today. And I wanted the book to come out. It's interesting. They say when we write, show, don't tell. My book is intended to show how I learned about these skills of living life masterfully and how I applied them to my own life. And the courses tell how to do that. And that's actually part of the promise of my book. So I wanted the book to come out at the same time that the course is launched, and it all has come together for May 1st.
So the thing I do want to talk about that I don't think we've discussed yet in our talk today is this dream that motivated your life, this dream that got you caught up in pursuing it, which made you vulnerable to the pedophile, the dream that you accomplished in a different way from what you expected, and then what happened when you lost that dream or walked away from it or completed it. We don't want to give everything away. You discuss this all in the book. But what was the dream that drove your life for so long that you were pursuing? And what is perhaps then after, well, let's keep to one. What was the dream you were pursuing then? And then I'll ask you the next question.
Yeah. When I was 8 years old and I had my first encounter with a horse, I was moved beyond anything I'd experienced in my life. I absolutely fell in love with the animal, but also watching people ride them. And that my dream, once I started riding, was to become an accomplished equestrian, just top rate, top flight equestrian. I didn't know the word mastery, but I wanted to master the art of riding horses. And when I met my predator, he introduced the dream, well, what if you became so good you could make an Olympic team? And I say in the book, at that time, it was 1972, there was Olympic fever going on. We had just come out of the Summer Olympics and we were headed into a Winter Olympics. And I was fascinated. I was watching it on TV at night. And so my whole thinking was around that. So when he held out that dream, I jumped on board because his offer was, if you train with me, I can get you there. And there were caveats. If you're talented enough, if you'll work hard enough, it wasn't a guarantee, but he was the one who was going to lead me there. And then as my life unfolded and I was balancing between my career and making lots of other decisions, which of course are all outlined in the book, I was as enamored about building my own horse farm, just having my own stables with my own horses to do it the way that I wanted to do it. And of course, nobody goes to the Olympics without a coach. I was willing to say, okay, I'll find my coach when the timing's right. I'm going to focus on my career and earn enough money to own my own farm and own my own horses. Well, as the career unfolded, I got further and further away from actually riding actively or competing, which is you have to do to go to the Olympics. And so it ends up, as I said, and I don't think this is too much of a spoiler, you Google me online and find out, instead of going to the Olympics as an athlete and competing, I went as the team leader. and manage the whole process for the other athletes of getting there and then taking care of them at the Olympic Games. And that was as fulfilling to me as any dream about going to the Olympics. When that was completed, and that I won't give away, I didn't have a dream. I said, okay, I'm getting to that age. I better think about retirement. I'm not ready yet, but I better start making some good money. And every decision was, all right, what am I going to do? Something would present itself. I'd make a choice and then do something. And I got more and more into that mode. Now, I was riding and training horses very actively. They hadn't gone out of my life. I was teaching all over the United States, and I was giving lectures and seminars, but I didn't have my own horse, and I wasn't training for me. And then I hit a situation where the alcohol took control, and that I won't give away. So it was incredible focus through my tenure in as a professional managing Olympic teams that ended right at the end of 2009. And then I went through 10 years without a real solid dream. I don't think it's a fulfilling dream for me just to earn money so that I can retire. There was no fulfillment in that. And now, through sobriety, I've identified my new dream, which is to teach and to empower others to live their lives masterfully. And then that's led me to designing the courses that I teach and to writing and the things that I have now with, for the first time I can enjoy with sobriety.
Well, that was going to be my next question. What is your new dream, which you've answered, right? To help other people, to teach, to live your life fully now in sobriety, and to deal with those things. So when I think of your book, you talk about the equestrian life, you talk about going to the Olympics, you talk about these dreams, a pursuit of dreams. Who do you think could benefit from reading your memoir? Is it really just geared for people who are in the equestrian world or people interested in the Olympics? Who would you say would benefit from reading your memoir?
Well, the first part is it is not intended for the equestrian community, which might seem odd. The way I explain that is I happened to be in that world. People are in all sorts of different worlds. So it is not written for the equestrian community. In fact, I know you and I did a lot of work to make sure that I didn't get lost in jargon, lingo, the technicalities of riding, because I intend for my reader to maybe have never been near a horse and know nothing about the sport. And so what I'm trying to create for them is it's a passion and a dream that people have, just like you may have a passion and a dream for the violin, or you may have a passion and a dream for another sport, or for researching, or for study. It doesn't matter what it is. It's about having a passion. But as far as who I think would benefit, I went to the website statista.com and saw that there were 124 million men over the age of 20 living in the United States on July 1st of 2022. Since I've learned that 1 in 6 men have suffered from some form of sexual abuse as a child, based on those numbers, there'd be about 20 million men in the US who could benefit from reading my memoir. And that's just one country. I believe that in reading about my journey, those men would identify with and relate to themes that are not unique to my situation and most likely are part of theirs. And they'd see that they're not alone and that there's nothing wrong with them. They could see there's nothing to be guilty about or ashamed of, and that they can heal if they recognize what they're dealing with and ask others for help. And then I figured if half of those men are in a committed relationship, that would mean at least 10 million others could benefit because they love and support those men. And a key to being able to support them lies in being able to understand what they've been through. And then, of course, they're the close friends and family members who also love and support those men. And they may gain a deeper understanding of what they've been through and what they need from the people they love.
As you share that, what strikes me is, as part of working with you and then discussing, perhaps going the agent, finding a literary agent and things like that, we looked at comparable titles in your genre. And one of the books I read, which you read too, was Chosen by Stephen Mills. And my experience, not being one of these people that you've just explained as being ideal readers for your book, or people could benefit from reading your book, is that it was so beneficial to me because as I read your memoir, and that was my first memoir where I read about pedophilia and the sexual abuse of boys, and then I read Chosen by Stephen Mills. I could actually, by the time I was reading Stephen Mills's book, read it and go, oh, this is what happened to Gil. Oh, I can see a parallel in Gil's story. Oh, this is
Yeah.
how pedophiles operate. This is how they single out the boys who are vulnerable. And I started seeing the pattern, and that's just from reading 2 books. And I remember
Yeah.
thinking then at the time, if more people read books like this, we actually have a social commentary on how these things work, and we no longer have a taboo subject that we don't talk about. We actually can perhaps more easily identify things that play out under our noses per se without even knowing about it, if we can identify the common traits in these types of behaviors.
Yeah. A clear intention of mine in writing this was to answer the question that people have is, these children have parents who love them. They have people in their lives who care about them, who are watching them. How can this happen? These aren't orphans running around the streets on their own. These are people coming from families with solid back. How does this happen? And that was my intention, was to lay it out and say, all right, here's how I became vulnerable. These were my vulnerabilities. Here's what put me in the path of a pedophile. And here's how it unfolded. And here's why I didn't get out. I couldn't get out. And then the rest of the book is about, well, what does that do to someone? How does that impact your life? Because it is complex PTSD. And we probably all know people who are dealing with it and simply aren't able to identify it themselves, or they're not comfortable to talk about it with feelings of shame. There's something wrong with me if I'm suffering from this. And that's a huge point of my book. There's nothing wrong with people. And when I saw the statistic 1 in 6 men, I was shocked, because I don't know that I know a lot of people. I couldn't imagine 1 out of 6 being in that situation, yet I trust the statistic.
Given your public persona, given the jobs you've done, the work you've done, how you worked with the US dressage team, there are people who are going to read your book who would never have known, like you said, your history, because you didn't tell them what happened when you were 14, 15, 16 years old. And yet
That's right.
It's going to be an eye-opener for them too. And that's the whole point. We all can be living very successful lives, but we're actually living very broken lives at the same time, and operating out of that place. And there reaches a point, which you discuss in your book too, where it's like, you've now got to take stock. You've now got to address the things that have been unaddressed in your life for so long. And unless you want to speak to that point, do you want to just leave it so people can read when it was you reached that point in your own life?
I think I'd leave it for them to read, but what I would add in is today in the equestrian world, and it's no different than any other world that has high performance sport. It can be gymnastics, it can be skating, it can be swimming, any of those sports. The public is becoming aware of the sexual abuse that's happening with teens in the early days of the sport. And I know in the horse world, quite a bit of press is being dedicated now to the topic of safe sport. It's the organization that the government formed to take this on with the national sport federations and the national governing bodies. And it's not just the equestrian sport. It's the example that I know best. There's way more of this that has gone on and is going on. But my feeling is, now that it's being talked about and people are on the lookout for this, it's going to impact in a very positive way and reduce the occurrences of this and how often it happens, simply because people are now aware. And I make a reference in my book to the after the Olympics about the 500 gymnasts who went through Larry Nassar's torture chamber. And there's so much of that goes on. And so again, I, in my story, tell about how long it took before I recognized the cost of that and the price that was paid. And I used an analogy of the cost that Olympians pay. You know, if we knew the true story of every Olympian who makes it in front of the camera with their victory, there's quite an arduous tale behind how they got there. And in many cases, they pay a price. I remember an interview I saw on TV with the Russian gymnast Nadia Comaneci. And she had been, I think it was in the 1980s, just the superstar from Russia of gymnastics. And they interviewed her as an adult and said, with all the successes you've had and what you know now, would you do it again? And she said, no. The price has been too high. She said, I wouldn't do it. So it's an interesting topic, and I'm so glad it's finally coming to light and people are discussing it. My book's an effort to do just that and to show people another version of how this plays out.
So, Gil, as a first-time author, what advice do you have for others who are ready to write their memoir?
I'd say to them, spend a lot of time before they begin writing to be crystal clear about the promise of their book. The writing process will flow much more effectively if they've identified from the outset the themes that are going to run through the story. And then once they begin the writing process, to remember, whatever they first put on the page will not be what ends up in the final draft. I probably spent 5 times more effort editing than I did creating original prose. But as soon as an idea forms that feels like it's part of the story, get it out of their head and onto the page, no matter how horrible they think it may sound. And trust that it will change and that no one will ever see it. In my case, when I look at my original manuscript, draft 1, I can hardly recognize it as the manuscript I finally published. And then I like to say, as the proverb says, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. And then, like Nike says, just do it. Just get it out of your head and onto the page and trust that it'll all work out in the end. And the last thing, believe it when you hear experts say you will need to kill some of your darlings. My writing room floor looks like a battlefield from the Civil War with all the dead bodies I've created. But I hang on to those scenes for the future, just in case. I really do love them. However, now having received the book in hard copy and I read through it as if I were a first-time reader, there are no missing scenes. And those scenes would have interrupted the flow. They were not speaking to the theme. And I can't thank you enough, because I never would have known how to choose to do that. I have a better feel now, but it's a real challenge in writing to do that. And so again, my advice, write them, get them out of your head, but be willing to kill them or put them in a save file. That's what I did with mine. They're not really on the floor. They didn't go anywhere.
Well, I love the way you say you read through your book again and there were no missing scenes. Because that's what people think. Oh, well, if I haven't said this, then how are they going to know this? Well, how's this going to play out? But once you know, like you're saying, what the premise is of your memoir, what the promise is, what the main focus is everything in your book speaking to that. And like you say, anything that's that's taking us somewhere else, it's got to go. And then once you've honed that, you have a whole story with no missing scenes. So I really love the way that you said that. So as we wrap this up now, Gil, where can people get your book? Where is it available? And how can they get in touch with you if for some reason they'd like to have you for an interview or something like that? They'd like to have you go on their channel or something. Where can they get the book and how can they get in touch with you?
Super. Well, it's available in paperback. It's a Kindle ebook, and it's also an audiobook, and that's through Audible. And they're all on Amazon.com. So Google, there's another author named Gil Merrick, and he's a soccer player from England, and he takes up a lot of my online SEO. So I have to battle with him, but it's on Amazon.com. It's Haunted Victory and my name, and it comes right up. And it's also part of the reader libraries on the Book Sirens and the Goodreads sites. And reaching me is very easy. My email is gil@gilmerrick.com. And I'm online every day and would love to hear from people. And if there's part of this story that in the telling of it in person is helpful to people, I'm always available to either do this on a Zoom, and if it's a large enough group and wants to really interact, I'd also be happy to travel somewhere and talk about it. So I appreciate you organizing this interview and giving me this kind of exposure and letting me talk about it. I think you can hear I'm passionate about the message, and I truly believe it can help a lot of people who may still be looking to figure out what to do with their own trauma.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for coming and listening to this interview.